What do you know about the Coliseum? That was a boom time development, wasn't it?
It was pretty much the place where people went.
Sure.
For entertainment. I mean, you hear some of the stories of the bands that played there, and it was amazing.
Most of the big white swing bands, I think, played there. And because it was in the segregation area, the counterpart in the black community was on 22nd Street South with the Manhattan Casino.
Correct.
And of course, they had all the big name bands come there and play as well.
The Coliseum in the 20s and 30s was kind of like the Amalie Arena of today, where everybody who was anybody musically performed there. But didn't some of the acts perform at the Coliseum and then that same night leave and go play at the
Absolutely,
Manhattan?
they sure did. And sometimes they would gather for impromptu jam sessions in people's houses, I'm told.
That's very cool.
Yes, it is.
It's very important for people to have diverse cultural experiences so that they can better understand and empathize with people around the world.
Sometimes you can take away things from those other cultures and add it into your own life, and it's very inspirational.
I learned so much about the culture of Japan, what it means to be in another country, what it means to have a host family in another country.
It's truly a very unique and amazing experience. It offers an immersion opportunity that's really once in a lifetime. You can't find it anywhere else.
I definitely learned so much more about their culture. I learned how everyday life is lived. You learn to love the people that you're staying with. You learn to love where you're surrounded.
One of the events was going to the Yashima Temple. It's a temple up on a mountain in Takamatsu, and it's otherworldly. It's absolutely beautiful.
I'd only really seen photos of the temples before, and it's quite a different experience seeing them in person.
I just remember it was so beautiful, and the more temples and things like that you visit, the more you appreciate the culture and appreciate the historical significance of Japan.
This is maybe a once-in-a-lifetime program. Even though Japan is on the other side of the world, I have another host family out there. I have another family out there.
It's really a great opportunity to exercise that interest in culture and learn more about Japanese culture specifically.
Not only is it educational, but it's also inspirational. It really inspired me to get out and travel more, and there's so much more for the world to see, different cultures, different foods, different lifestyles, and it's just so important that people realize and seek the world around them.
The culture of St. Pete, when I arrived in '97, I like saying it was nascent. It was percolating under the ground, but there were no coffee shops. There wasn't the Globe coffee shop that Joylyn Schilke created. There was no place for people to hang to say, I've experienced this, now let me talk about it over a cup of joe. And, but it was nascent, and I also think there were a lot of creative people in St. Petersburg who were kind of doing their own thing, and we just, some say a catalyst, but I think it's kind of a centrifuge where this goes in, 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 and then you go, and so I think we primarily just put a mirror up to the community and say, where y'all at? And that's how we came to be. I know we initially talked about it as being a theater, but that was the least of what we were going to do insofar as we knew that we wanted a place for the community to come together without hurt, harm, or danger, and, you know, speak on or about or for all sorts of things. And we had to find out what those things were, so.
Well, I can say that when I got here in '08, because a lot of people don't know, that my first performance in St. Pete was here. This was the place to be. Everybody was talking about the studio. They wanted to work at the studio. They wanted to be at the studio. The community is the reason why it succeeds, and we get to feed the community. So it's a cycle, right? It's synergetic. It's and everybody needs to feel like they have a home.
When we talk about the Indian mounds, and Rui, you may think of it this way too, I think of that big sign out on Park Street that says, Panfilo de Narvaez landed here.
Everyone assumes that they landed somewhere on the Pinellas Peninsula when you can't really say exactly where. There were probably Indian mounds that covered the city from the coffee pot area all the way around the peninsula, up the west side of the city to to where Seminole is today, because there's still traces and evidence of them.
So there are a couple that remain here and there, but what happened to the rest of them? How come we don't see them in more spots around town?
When the automobile arrived in Florida and into St. Petersburg, imagine having an automobile with a tire that's that wide trying to drive up down Central Avenue and around downtown, getting stuck a lot in the sand. So a lot of those Indian mounds were used by city leaders. They used it to actually pave the streets of downtown St. Pete. That's
what became of history in that regard, huh?
Exactly. Wow. So every time you Central Avenue and 3rd Street, when you cross Central Avenue, you say hello to some of the Indians that may still be there. Who knows?
Who knows?
So Bobby, I have heard the origin story of your relationship with Jamie and how that kept you here, but I don't think I've ever heard why you wanted to start the studio.
Well, that's a very good question, but I think it stemmed more from, somebody told me this years later, that Jamie was just trying to find something for me to do. Because Dave Ellis and myself, we had not fully formed what the studio would be. And Jim was out looking for a building, found this place, and we were calling it a theater, but not necessarily. And I had never run a nonprofit before. I've worked for dozens of them, but I had never run one. And so I think it was a convergence of several things, and we just grew into it being what we now understand to be the studio, which is something David Ellis and myself never did an elevator speech or the one sound bite. It's many things. Lately, people have been calling it St. Petersburg's living room, which sounds nice. It's a home for the visual and performing arts, but it's evolved. But we never had a specific defining, we're gonna do this. It just evolved.
Wonderful. Good morning, everyone. We're going to call to order today's Housing, Land Use, and Transportation Committee meeting. Will the clerk please call roll?
Floyd.
Here.
Harding. Driscoll.
Here.
Gabbard.
Here.
Fix Sanders.
Great, thank you. Committee members, we have an agenda before us. Do you have a motion for approval?
Move approval.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, motion passes. We also have the approval of the May 8th, 2025 minutes before us. Committee members, do I have a motion
Move
for approval?
approval.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, then motion passes, so we'll go on to our new business, which is an Affordable Housing Advisory Committee update. And we're going to be started with Mark Van Loo, and we have the first-time chair of the Affordable Housing Advisory Committee, Jillian Bandies.
First time.
I mean, you're the new chair.
I am kind of new.
Yeah. You've been chair for this year, yeah. So I'll let y'all take it away. I'm on the Affordable Housing Advisory Committee as well. Been enjoying that role. It's my first term on there also. So I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Chair and committee members. We have a short presentation just to kind of provide a mid-year update on where we are with the AHAC committee and kind of also an overview for those who may not be as familiar with the process. So I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Bandies to kick us off with the first 4 slides. That is kind of an overview of the committee, its work, and our sort of annual plan that we work under. And then I'll pick it up there and talk about some of the exciting new things that the committee is discussing and considering for this year's annual report. So, Jillian, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, good morning.
Assuming the clerks.
Everyone here is already familiar with the SHIP AHAC Committee, State Housing Initiative Partnerships Affordable Housing Action Committee. A very easy to say title.
No, sorry. We were distracted by something else. Go ahead. Yeah, and I do think the committee members that are here today know about the Affordable Housing Advisory Committees, but it's a good overview for people who might not be here but are watching.
There we go. Okay, so SHIP AHAC is in charge of overseeing, by my count, between 30 and 40% of the monies available to construct or renovate affordable homes here in St. Pete. If you think about it like a pie, SHIP receives between $1.8 and $2 million a year. The general fund has $1 million. The In Lieu program contributes about $500K. And HUD contributes about $1.5 million. So if you take all that together, you get somewhere between $5 and $7 million, not including sale of city-owned land, or of course, other sources of funding that come in on like an ad hoc basis. So in terms of consistent recurring funds, maybe $5 to $7 million. And of that, $2 million is under SHIP. And so in order to receive that money from the state, we have to agree to these guidelines, which you're all familiar with, the 19 recommendations on affordable housing. And in my 6 years on SHIP AHAC, those have stayed pretty consistent. We've added and reduced those as we've seen fit. I think it's a useful committee. I'm pleased to understand that HLUT takes them seriously, and I understand on the state level, via the illustrious Avery Sliker, that the recommendations that SHIP AHAC comes up with are actually, taken in earnest. So on the state level, these things are actually looked at. Unfortunately, funding on the state level has gone down, as we all know, and so that does jeopardize some of the programs that have been in place. But the committee is meaningful, and I think the group that is assembled there is a pretty good cross-section of the industry. I think we have a pretty good understanding of what helps and what doesn't help. So moving through the slides here, we've recommended modification of the policies that have been put forth in front of us. Now that Mark is the illustrious staff member, he's turning things upside down and making sure that we really juice up these recommendations, which is very exciting. The incentive programs that we've come up with, I think have made a difference. I mean, it definitely informs the conversation. I think at the citizen advisory level as well as at the staff level and at the council level, I hope. So I look forward to Mark kind of talking through some of the new stuff that's coming down the pike. And then, of course, we've got to do the reporting piece, which we have done successfully every year that I've been a member. Here's the group. We're a motley bunch. We have to have these certain categories, and as Mark notes, this year we have 4 of us terming off. It'll be a very sad departure, and you will have to find 4 more people to fill these roles. If I could offer my, good morning.
Good morning, I apologize, thank you.
If I could offer unsolicited advice, folks that really do a lot of deal making in this business are critical to understanding what effective policies are. I work with a lot of nonprofits. I have a lot of respect for them. I think they're critical in terms of providing infrastructure support, money for affordable housing. Doesn't substitute for folks that are on the ground trying to make deals work. And I think in the conversation about affordable housing, those types of individuals are often maybe not pushed to the side, but not given the kind of importance that is required, because building affordable housing, renovating affordable housing, finding money for affordable housing, putting money together for affordable housing is very hard. And guys that are doing it are highly paid and have high levels of expertise, and so that expertise is just invaluable. Not to say we don't need the community activists. They're essential for the mission. But folks doing the work, you can't substitute them. So in January, the new committee's members are appointed. In February through September, we review existing incentives. In October, the report is finalized. We have a public hearing, and then we present to AHAC. My understanding is that these presentations are sort of formalities. It goes through like clockwork, and luckily that allows us to meet the requirement to get the SHIP funds. So here are the developer incentives, which Mark is going to review and I'm going to chime in.
Okay, thank you. So as you probably know, there are currently a total of 19 developer incentives adopted by the city, 11 that are recommended by the state. They're basically required by the state in that if we do not implement any of those 11 that the state recommends, we have to justify in our annual report why we don't implement that particular one. But in our case, we have and continue to implement all 11 recommended by the state, as well as 8 additional incentives that have been approved over time and added to the mix. And as Jillian said, the first thing we do every year after getting everybody new on board is we review those 19 and we talk about, are they still effective? Are they still needed? Is there some sort of tweaking that needs to be done in order to keep them relevant and keep them helpful to developing more affordable housing? So that's what we did in our February and March meetings. And then in this particular year, there are no recommended changes to or deletions of those current 19. We feel like all of them are still relevant, all are still helping. So we want to keep all of those in our recommendations to continue. And then AHAC and staff will work to create a clearer and more comprehensive incentive guide for developers. So this is available. Developers can go on the city website and find those incentives. But there was some discussion during the review of those that not all developers really get it. Not all of them know to go there and look. And when they do find it, it's really just kind of a list of those incentives. So we talked about creating a more comprehensive guide to those incentives that we put out in additional ways to make sure we're reaching the developer community, those who may not be familiar with or new to working with the city. So that's a sort of side piece of work we're doing this year, is creating that more comprehensive and informative guide. So now on to, in our May meeting and again in our August, September meetings, we will be discussing, researching, and deciding on any new additional incentives that AHAC would like to recommend to City Council. And so some of the things that we're talking about, and this is not necessarily an exhaustive list, this is what was brought up in the May meeting. there may be additional ideas, or these ideas may morph as we do some research on them and discuss them further before we issue or create our final report, annual report that we'll finalize in October. It'll go to public hearing in November and then come to City Council to receive that report in December. But the first item is there was a discussion about the cost of capital being a big barrier to being able to create housing, and especially affordable housing, meaning the cost to borrow money to do that largely, and also the returns that investors need to be able to invest in projects. So the idea was put on the table of, could the city provide essentially guarantees, or as it was framed in the meeting, a backstop to the capital that's needed for developers. This is something that I've mentioned before in a couple of meetings, this idea where could the city have a pool of funding that operates as a sort of loan guarantee program where it partially guarantees a loan to basically buy down interest for developers. I've also mentioned the idea of possibly even lending, the city being a lender for the construction loan at a reduced or zero interest, which means money that would be able to continue to circle and come back to us rather than go into a project and stay there forever. So it'd be another way for us to assist in getting projects done and get that money back in a relatively short time frame, probably within about 2 years typically, when the construction loan would convert to permanent financing, and it could really move the needle on the cost of development. So it's in that vein. In this case, it's the idea that the city would take a pool of money, use it to back or guarantee portions of loans from banks, but it would allow lower interest rates, lower cost, and it would be a different way to provide a subsidy to make a project work, would likely lessen the amount of cash subsidy that they might need to ask the city for to make the project work. And then that would just stay there and revolve and continue to do that work without having to constantly replenish that fund. So there's a lot of research to do there. Legal did raise the specter of needing to look into whether the city can even do that or not, and if so, what sources of funds could be used to do something like that. So we're early in that process, but I wanted you to start to see some of these ideas that are coming onto the table. The second bullet point is consider establishing a permanent source for affordable and workforce housing development subsidy, potentially by a bond issue. That's been talked about in the city quite a bit, and I'm not sure exactly where we stand. I think we're going to have some more conversation this year, at least in administration, about that idea. And so this was something that the committee felt, you know, we because of the lately constantly reducing amounts that we're getting from the federal and state governments, we're going to be able to do less and less if we don't find ways to maintain the level of funding support. And really, due to the increasing costs of projects, we really need to increase the amount of funding we have available if we want to maintain how much progress that we're able to make today. So that's another idea that we're starting to discuss and research, and we'll try to flesh that out a little bit more prior to whether it makes it into our final annual report as a recommendation or not. Sorry about that. Hit the wrong button.
Yeah, quicker.
There you go. Third bullet point is recommend the city advocate to reestablish the missing middle tax abatement program at the county level that was opted out of back in December by Pinellas County, and that the state advocate that the state consider setting a minimum number of years tax abatement will endure once a project is initially qualified. So this, you know, the two tax abatement programs, as you know, were the missing middle tax abatement program, which abated 100% of the property tax for eligible projects. That's what Pinellas County opted out of in December, so that is no longer available to developers. And then the local option tax abatement, which the City of St. Pete adopted and continues to operate, which forgives the city portion of property taxes. The missing middle tax abatement program was allowed to be used for projects with units up to 120% of area median income. the local options city program can only be used on units with tenants earning 60% of area median income or below. So it's very limited, not only in the scope of projects it can help, but also in the amount of taxes that are, property taxes that are abated. But the big problem really with either of those tax abatement programs is the intent was to reduce the operating costs for developers to entice more affordable housing to be built. The problem is that the way to monetize a tax abatement is to be able to show that it is going to reduce your operating costs over a period of time, which would enable you to potentially carry more debt to finance your project and or attract investor equity due to higher returns. Both of these tax abatement programs could end at any time. As we saw with Pinellas County, they were able to and chose to opt out. So that's off the table. The city program is only enabled by the Live Local Act, which will sunset eventually by its own devices, but also you never know from year to year what a state legislature might do. So bottom line is no developer can count on these tax savings for any particular length of time. It's year by year. And in my opinion, what it results in really is kind of a windfall to the developer. If they get it in a given year, they save a bunch of tax money and they're more profitable. But do they put that into creating more affordable housing? Hard to say because it is a year by year thing that you can't count on. So not only are we talking about recommending that in our advocacy efforts we try to advocate for the missing middle tax abatement program to be reinstated in Pinellas County, but also that the state in its next round of tweaks to the Live Local Act might consider saying, for example, once a project is approved for a tax abatement program, whichever it might be, that it's guaranteed to get that tax abatement for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, whatever the time period would be, even if that program is ended by the legislation or local opting out or something like that. It would give a guaranteed set time frame that the developer could count on those savings. That can be used when you go to get debt and other things to finance your project. The next bullet point is look for ways to reduce the application and paperwork burden for those seeking workforce housing units that are what we call 120% AMI or below. So this stemmed from a conversation in our last meeting about 120% AMI and below units. The fact that the rent on those units, the rent caps currently are equal to market rate, sometimes even exceed what the market will bear in today's climate. And the fact that we've seen some projects with 120% AMI restricted units who are struggling to rent those units. A couple of cases in point are the ARIA project that is currently in lease up. They've reached out a couple of times and said that they're struggling to find tenants for their 120% units. And the Bayou Court project, which has units in various ranges up to 120%, and their 100 and 120% AMI units, they have not flown off the shelf, so to speak. So we were curious why, and as Jillian pointed out, due to the expertise on the AHAC panel, a couple of folks who work in that realm said, here's the problem. Let's take ARIA and pick on them. They have a brand new unit and it's at 120% restriction. They have the rent set at the cap, which could be above market rent for a similar, say, 2-bedroom apartment elsewhere. But even if they lower the rent to match what the market would bear, if they rent at ARIA, because it's a restricted unit, they have to turn in all kinds of paperwork. They have to prove their income. They have to, jump through all those hoops to show that they're qualified for that unit to get a unit and pay the same rent that they could go down the street to a project that's not restricted, get a similar unit, similar price, but no paperwork, no hassles, no waiting time. So the suggestion was made, how can we recommend ways to reduce that paperwork burden for those missing middle type units so that they are more competitive with other projects that aren't restricted and they play on a sort of similar playing field and by the same rules as non-restricted units. This, of course, would change in in a market and in a climate where market rents begin to rise rapidly, and if those 120 AMI units, if the rent caps on those are well below what market rates would be, that'll all change. People will then be willing to do the paperwork and jump through the hoops to get those lower cost units. But as it stands right now, that is, we think, a large barrier to some of these new projects getting those missing middle units leased up. So we're looking at that. The third bullet point there is conduct a deep market analysis at the zip code level to determine where rents warrant greater investment of city funds and at what, like, AMI levels. So this isn't new. We already do this to a degree. However, AHAC is looking at recommending that we potentially even bring in a third party and outsource this work to really drill down and provide a deep analysis of where should we be directing city affordable housing dollars, given that, again, this kind of grew out of the discussion of fewer and fewer dollars, higher and higher cost projects. We're going to have to be making choices about which projects we fund and which we aren't able to. And we should be making sure that we're funding the projects that provide the most value to the citizens of St. Pete. So understanding on a really granular level across the city, where's the greatest need, where is the rent disparity the greatest, where's the greatest need in terms of income levels and things, and then that should inform where and how we direct our dollars, rather than just sort of, oh, a developer shows up, they have a project, it looks good, it makes sense, let's fund it and approve it. It's almost kind of a first come, first served sort of basis now. We do definitely consider location and things like that, but it's not a keen focus, at least not as keen as it could be. So before I move on, just to kind of summarize, those are the main things. You know, I did caution the committee, the AHAC committee, that we do have to focus our efforts. There are going to be lots of good ideas. We really need to drill down to the sort of top 4 to 6 ideas in any given year, and it takes time to research, to discuss, to figure out what, if anything, we want to do around that. And so these are the sort of 4 to 6 that bubbled to the top in this first meeting. Again, whether all these make it into the annual report and recommendations, I don't know yet. We have a lot of work to do, but wanted you to sort of get a mid-year glimpse of what we're looking at, what we're talking about. And then as Jillian mentioned earlier, in terms of member terms, I wanted to mention that 4 current members, longtime members, will be terming out. Their second terms will expire in early January. And you can see the names there. These are all well-known and long-time developers, very high expertise with all of them. And, you know, when you've had folks who've been on this AHAC committee for 6 years and are going to suddenly be gone, now we have some great new talent that's come in and some midterm people whose first terms are wrapping up. So I think it's paced out pretty well. But point is, we do have several submitted applications in our hopper from people who've applied in the past. We would have to reach out because it's been a little while to see if they still have interest and ability to participate. But I would also like to put it in front of this committee that we're always looking for recommendations of people who would be a great fit for the AHAC committee. And specifically, as you might have noticed from the chart that showed the different areas of expertise the committee members bring, we really don't have anybody with banking and mortgage industry experience. We really would like to get somebody on with that. We can always reach out to outside parties for that if we don't have it in committee, but it'd be great to have that actually on the committee. And similarly with city planning background and experience. So the city planning team has been great about attending the meetings, coming up when we have questions and they're called upon. But I also think it'd be great to have non-St. Pete planning team people with planning and background so that they can contribute from a little different perspective. So those are 2 focus areas for the replacement members that we'll be looking for that will begin in January 2026. And it is a 3-year term that can be 2 3-year terms before terming out for members who want to stay on. So that's our presentation. We just wanted to give you this mid-year update and give you a sense of where we're headed. And we're happy to entertain any questions you might have.
Chair and council members, I just wanted to mention that, as you know, the budget hasn't passed yet. We do have anticipated numbers for SHIP this year. There's an anticipated cut of $183,000. We'll see where that ultimately lands, but that's around the same cut we received last year. So, you know, just something to be aware of, that as that continues to be reduced, the number of programs that we can continue for citizens will be impacted.
Thank you. All right. Questions? We'll go to Councilmember Gabbard.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you both for the presentation today. Congratulations on your chairwomanship. Very happy that you are taking the helm. Have always enjoyed working with you, Jillian, and just really respect your expertise and what you bring to the table. Serving on the committee for one term prior to my colleague, Councilmember Floyd, taking over, and as the predecessor to them, Councilmember Amy Foster, now Housing Administrator. You know, I really have always appreciated the expertise. I have always looked at the Affordable Housing Advisory Committee as our subject matter experts in this realm. In very early 2018, the very first new business item that I ever put forward to this council was to formalize this group. I thought it was very important that we make sure that we have a standing committee of stakeholders who are constantly engaged in this process. We as elected officials, some of us have backgrounds in housing, some of us don't. We come from a very wide range of expertise ourselves, but when we sit here at this table, it's very important that we are passing policy that the stakeholders and the community who will utilize that policy have buy-in for, have had a opinion on, have helped us to make better. And I think that the work that you all have done over the years has shown that model to be effective. You know, in those days, early, 2017, 2018, 2019, we were kind of biting around the edges of affordable housing, but we weren't really in it the way that we needed to make an impact. And I really think that the Affordable Housing Advisory Committee was the pivot that really helped us to get to the place where we have policy that, quite frankly, I mean, you now get to go to these meetings with the Florida Housing Coalition and the region, and I'm sure that you have experienced, as I always did, that there's a lot of times that St. Pete is used as the example. We're used as the blueprint. We're talked about in a way that really helps to show that when you are creative, when you are collaborative, that is when the work really gets done. So I just want to thank you guys for what you do. I have a couple of questions. One of the things that you mentioned, Mark, on the recommendations that you're going to be looking at is this lessening of the application paperwork burden. I just wanted to be clear, are those requirements that we as the city put on, or are those requirements that come down either from HUD, from SHIP? Can you talk about where those requirements, who is the one that dictates those?
So it is typically dictated by the funding source that we have to have a process to ascertain that the folks who are renting these units or buying these units are income qualified. And we have worked to come up with the best possible system that gets us what we need without being overly burdensome. But we feel like maybe there's some additional room for improvement. Maybe there's some, especially maybe at that missing middle mark, is there, does that make a difference? Is kind of one of the questions.
Yeah.
Should there be less of a burden if you're, just having to prove that you're 120% AMI versus, getting a more deeply affordable unit that requires a lot more subsidy? So we're really kind of looking at the funding sources and what their actual requirements are. In some cases, they're very kind of open-ended and just say you must have a process, ascertain this, and we will probably audit you at some point, and you'll have to have backup and proof that you did enough to guarantee that these folks are income qualified. Other funding sources are much more specific about the steps you have to take. So we're looking at that to determine, is there any way that we can streamline this, that we can make it easier, better? It may only get down to how can we work with the the developments and the property management companies who handle the lease ups, and be more proactive with them in getting people qualified, in holding, whatever that looks like. Could we hold, information meetings out at the property when they're in lease up to help people understand what it looks like, help hold people's hand to get through the process? Right now, it's just kind of, oh, you want to rent a